Is there a ghostly cause for the scent of lavender perfume in the halls?
Can you still hear the voices of departed residents?
Is there something nefarious in the attic?
Find out the answers to these questions and more as we uncover the frightening hauntings and history from the Fairfield County Infirmary in Lancaster, Ohio.
I'm Sarah.
And I'm Erica.
And this is The Haunted Atlas, a Haunted US podcast.
In the interest of fully exploring history of certain locations, Haunted Atlas may discuss sensitive or disturbing topics. Listener discretion is advised.
Set against an unassuming rural backdrop, the Fairfield County Infirmary lurks as a sprawling brick testament to time. With sections of this mammoth building crumbling and overgrown, this location looks as haunted as it is. And indeed, it's full of history and hauntings. Our story begins in 1828 with a wooden almshouse. And this was built to accommodate the poor, elderly, infirm, widowed, orphaned, insane, and criminal. So we have quite a mix of people here in this Fairfield County Infirmary.
Yeah, it's kind of nice, I think, that they at least tried to expand the use of it to all of those.
Yeah, and if you think of how many people fall into that category in a town, it's probably a lot.
Yeah.
It did become overcrowded and conditions were less than ideal.
Yeah.
Because that's a lot of people under one roof. By the 1830s, it became officially considered overcrowded to the residents. And this isn't that long after it opened, because it opened in 1828. So it hasn't been that long.
Yeah, I mean, less than 10 years, it almost seems like the town sort of grew bigger than they would have expected, if that's happening.
And I'm sure word spread as well, because you have to think about this. This is the early 1800s. This has to spread by word of mouth. So it opens in 1828. Maybe it gets a few people, and then other people hear about it. More and more people keep coming in.
Right.
And then we have this overcrowding issue.
Right.
The residents were complaining about this until 1840. And finally, it was deemed that it needed to be expanded.
Right.
In 1865, it was expanded again to accommodate for a huge influx, because this is right around when the Civil War widows and veterans were coming in.
That does make a lot of sense, honestly. Pennsylvania was a pretty big part of the Civil War, so I think it makes sense that a lot of people that were affected were near Ohio.
That's actually a great point. And I think also when you think of a town, it has grown a lot within 40 years.
Right.
So these towns that might have started as smaller, a few families, and then the families have children, and they have more people that come, and it becomes a true settlement. That's going to lead to more people needing this almshouse as well.
Yes.
So I think it's twofold. As time went on, it continued to expand, reaching a record of 83 residents in 1903. And I have to say, before I read that stat, I was thinking there was like hundreds of people here,
Yes.
and I don't know why.
Me too. I was genuinely thinking like 500 people packed into this house. And so when you said 83, my brain for a second was like, oh, okay. But that's a lot of people at that time.
Right. When you consider 83 people living under one roof,
Yes.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
It's like a dorm. In 1917, the building got gas lighting and heating. And in 1926, it got indoor plumbing.
Gas heating. That's great. That's
Yes.
a good addition to this building.
Yeah, and these are luxuries at
Yes.
the time. 1917, you have gas heating, and 1926, indoor plumbing. That's pretty nice.
Yeah.
Electric lighting was added by 1958, so even more upgrades, trying to keep up with the times.
Yes.
And in addition to these modernizations in the 1950s, the focus had really shifted to more so be on the sick and the elderly and less on the poor and widowed.
Okay. I was going to ask if it had like kind of reined in the focus a little bit or if it was still for this wide range of people, because I do think that it is rare, I think, in history for a building of this purpose to update it as much as they have been. So I think that's really nice, especially as they like hone in their focus.
Yeah, and you have to draw the line somewhere. That's a lot of categories that they started with, and they don't mix well. For example, people that might be disabled might need more care than people that are simply widowed.
Right.
So maybe the widowed people had more solutions, or maybe it was becoming less taboo for widows to live alone at this time.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense, actually. Because when we first started talking about it, I almost had a moment where I was like, I wonder if houses for widows were popular back then or were kind of way more needed, obviously, than today because of the fact that they kind of weren't allowed to do things by themselves at that period of time.
Right. And if you think of the 1950s, 1960s, yes, I think there was an expectation to remarry if you were widowed, but I think it was a lot lower than the 1860s, where
Yes.
you weren't allowed to be alone, like you're talking about.
Right.
So it makes sense. Following all these modernizations and expansions, the total square feet of the building comes to a whopping 35,000.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, it is quite a large building.
Yes.
And the new band of residents was short-lived, as budget cuts eventually led to the sale of the property.
How soon was the building sold?
It was actually sold shortly after in 1965, and it was purchased by Ohio University. They closed it down in 1985. But it did not sit abandoned. It was converted to county offices the following year and renamed the Clarence E. Miller Building.
So did Ohio University not really do anything with the building in the 20 years, I believe?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
The Miller Building was home to the county health department for 27 years, with the building finally closing in 2013. However, there was an interest in both the paranormal and historical aspects of the building, so there was frequent requests for tours, either for the paranormal side, historical side, or both. The property was again sold in 2020 and has since become a hotspot for paranormal investigations.
Hi, I'm Hannah.
And I'm Matt Hannah.
We're Horror Hour with the Hannahs, a married couple who love digging into the guts of horror movies.
Literally and figuratively.
Whether it's new releases or cult classics, on our podcast we break down the scares, themes, and hidden messages with just the right amount of love and humor, with some occasional bickering.
So grab your popcorn and your emotional support blanket and join us Wednesdays
For a spooky good time with Horror Hour with the Hannahs.
Available wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe today, if you dare.
"2013 to me is so recent, and I know it was sold again in 2020, but really 2013, before the paranormal part of it started being more significant, is so recent.
Yes, when you consider how long this building functioned as an almshouse, as offices, etc., it's 180 years almost. That's a long time.
Yes, and a lot of different purposes.
And I wonder what they did with the 35,000 square feet when it was an office building.
I don't even know, because how many offices did they really need? That's so much space.
Yeah, I guess county health department offices take up a lot of space, but it seems like a lot of space.
Yeah.
It also seems like a lot of space to investigate.
Honestly, yes, which can be a good thing. I think it also could be a little overwhelming.
Yeah, I agree. Some of the claims here are more general hauntings, and they include things such as disembodied voices that are said to be heard throughout the building. In some cases, there are many voices that appear to all talk at once in a sort of overwhelming and disorienting way.
I do think that makes sense if we think about it in terms of it being an almshouse with so many different people there at one time. I imagine that it may have been chaotic.
Yeah, I agree. If you think of the fact that in 1903, it had 83 residents and it only continued to expand after that, that's a lot of voices to have in there at once.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a school cafeteria, sort of, where so many different voices are coming into your ears at one time.
That is a great description for what, from all of the things that I read, that's a great description for it. And people report that this even happens when they're alone and there's no identifiable cause for the sound, of course.
Right.
It makes sense. Obviously, if I'm in a room with you and I hear a voice, I'm not going to chalk it up to the paranormal.
Yes.
But if I'm in a room alone and I hear 15 voices, I'm going to start questioning things.
Definitely.
The auditory hauntings continue, with visitors reporting banging sounds and even doors physically slamming on their own.
That is a really terrifying thing, I think. I don't know how this building is set up. I don't know if there's hallways. I think that makes sense if it was, a an almshouse at one point, but I can't imagine being on one end of the hallway and hearing a door slam on the other end.
I agree. But I do want to state that this is an old building and it is not abandoned, but it's run down, let's say. So I would not be surprised if some of the doors slam on their own due to drafts or maybe the way that they're hanging, etc. So there's always that possibility. I think it's important to be a little skeptical.
Yeah.
Another general haunting is the smell of lavender perfume. This is reported throughout the building, to a degree not necessarily in one location, but as if someone with lavender perfume is following you around the building.
So that's super interesting. I would imagine it, if that's the case, that it's around the whole building, it would have to be a member of the staff. You would think maybe an infirmary nurse or someone who was there to help emotionally, morally, maybe not even just a nurse, someone visiting frequently who has like carried their scent throughout the building.
That's interesting because I was thinking it must have been a resident, but it could be a staff member. I was thinking resident because they probably spent so much time there.
Yeah.
But you have a good thought there with the moral investment of like a nurse or someone.
Right.
And I think it's interesting because a lot of times with hauntings that are related to the smell of something, we do like to be skeptical with wood expansion and contraction or fabrics that might hold the scent. But I think because it doesn't just linger in one space, it follows you throughout the hallways, it gives it more credence, in my opinion.
Yes. And if people aren't having this experience outside of the building, then you also can't have it chalked up to the trees or foliage outside. This would have to be definitely something that's occurring in the building.
That would be very funny if everyone's like, and it smells like lavender perfume. And they're like, there's a lavender farm down the hills. But no, to my knowledge, there is not.
Yeah.
Some visitors have reported objects moving on their own, and there have been tons of EVPs collected throughout the property as well. So some more generic things. Mm-hmm. Investigators also report issues with their equipment while on investigations. And I think that this is interesting when we have buildings that truly span so many years, because something that we would use today, like a radio even, that might be more familiar to a spirit that's from the 1950s, from the 1800s, they would have no idea what that is.
Yes.
The early 1800s. Not just radios, but everything, if you think about it. If there were no residents in the mid-1900s, then they might not be used to things like cell phones.
Yeah.
For example.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because I think there's two ways to kind of think about it. Like they might be so curious with what you're holding that they're kind of messing with it and trying to figure out what it is. Or they could be bothered by it because they're like, I don't know what this is. What is this doing in my place of residence?
See, that's interesting. I always think, oh, they're just turning it off.
Oh.
And I didn't think about the fact that they could be just pressing buttons, kind of like keyboard mashing.
Yeah.
Trying to figure out what it is, like, what is this doing? Does it make any noises? And that's interesting because aside from just cell phones, for example, the investigators have reported issues with their paranormal equipment. So that would make sense if they're messing with something like a spirit box, like turning dials.
Yeah.
Or trying to figure out what a REM pod is. I mean, imagine how startling.
Yes.
You just walk up to this device. It looks like a rock to you.
Right.
And it starts beeping at you and lighting up.
Yeah, I'm almost imagining just one spirit kind of messing with it while the rest of them are like behind the paranormal investigators like, yeah, what is this thing? And the paranormal investigators are trying to figure it out too. And everyone's just hunched up. Like if you could see both planes at once, there's like 7 people there trying to figure out what is going on with the spirit box.
That's funny. I like that. I'm going to have to take that stance whenever we run into places with so much history. Because it probably is true.
Yeah.
Versus I just thought, oh, they don't like it, get it out of there, turn it off.
Right.
It probably is trying to reach some level of understanding. The attic has its own slew of paranormal claims, and the biggest one is that people report an overall uneasy feeling. Now, you are in the attic of an abandoned infirmary.
Yes.
That is run down.
I think any attic sort of gives off a weird vibe. I think they used to be way more used, I think, in like the 19, maybe like 70s, 80s. But now I feel like they're not so much anymore. There's like more in-house storage. I could be wrong about that. But I feel like now attics and basements tend to have like a weird negative vibe, even if maybe there's nothing going on, you know?
I'll agree with that. I was going to say, I think you see less attics too.
Yeah.
I think you see more finished basements, and so maybe they just get a bad rap.
Yeah.
But this is not the scenario where it's just a bad rap. Because some investigations claim to see a 7-foot tall shadow figure lurking in the attic.
7 feet tall?
Yes.
Now that's interesting because people used to be shorter.
That's what I was thinking. And I'm not sure how they would approximate that. I guess if you compare it to someone in your group,
Yeah.
you could approximate it. But the other thing I was thinking is, you know how shadows themselves are long?
Yes.
I wonder if it is the shadow of a spirit.
That's really cool.
Yeah, I don't think we really see that though.
I mean, no, I don't think we've heard of that before. But in terms of the realistic attributes of a person of that time, that makes sense to me.
Yeah, I just wonder how it could be modified, how it could be morphing into the 7-foot figure.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that this isn't something other than a traditional shadow figure. It could be a shadow figure and it's just presenting that way.
Yeah.
But I like to think of how it could be causing that distortion.
Yes.
Further investigations have tried to interact with the shadow figure to figure out what or who it is, but thus far no one has been able to identify it that I could find.
Now, does the shadow figure sort of antagonize anyone up there, or does it mostly stay to itself and people just sort of see it?
It seems like it just lurks, but it's accompanied by that overall uneasy, negative feeling. So I think that's why people think that it has negative overall nature.
Right. Because I was going to say maybe it's possible that it's not communicating because it just wants to be left alone.
I was thinking of that. Does seem to be hiding in the attic.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering if it's a resident that used to go up there for some peace and quiet.
Yeah.
Maybe. And now here we are bothering it in the afterlife as well. Is there anything else that you could think of that it could be?
I'm trying to think about things that we've heard about before, because in a funny way, I'm almost like, I wonder if this was a really short person who is now like, I'm going to make myself 7 feet tall.
That's true. Or I was thinking maybe it was just someone that was like 6'5", and people don't say, oh, they look like they were 6'5 3/4. You're going to say 7 feet.
Right. Or honestly, on that note, people could be exaggerating a little bit. I think if you're in a sort of liminal space and not really sure about your surroundings and you get that negative feeling, if something's towering over you, even by like a foot, you might exaggerate it and think that it's like 2 to 3 feet higher than you.
That's a good point as well. I think it would depend how close you are to it and how intense you're feeling.
Yes.
It's no surprise that many former residents still linger in this infirmary.
Right.
So whether the shadow figure is a resident or not, we can't be sure. But there is one well-known ghost, and that is Willie. He is reported on the 2nd and 3rd floor in the infirmary. Visitors that encounter Willie note that he seems lost or confused, and he has been seen peering out windows and walking down the halls.
Oh no.
I know.
It's interesting that you said he was on 2 floors. My reasoning earlier for saying that it must have been a staff member walking through was I assume that residents are on their floors and they stay on their floor. Maybe that's not accurate, but if he's lost, maybe he can't figure out like which floor he's supposed to be on.
Or I was thinking maybe he's just an elderly person with dementia or something like that.
Yeah.
But I think you have a good point there. I think when we think of an infirmary, the word infirmary seems very dedicated room and dedicated space, maybe even locked door to us. But we have to remember that this is an almshouse from the 1830s.
Yeah.
So it was probably just, here is a place to sleep and here is food to eat, and you are welcome to roam the property as you'd like.
That's really fair. I definitely had a very modern version of the infirmary in my head.
Yeah, because if you think of even the 1960s, hospitals were different.
Right.
And that's a hospital, not that this was a hospital.
Right.
But it was a lot more loose than things are today, where people are behind locked doors, etc. So I think it would make sense that he's roaming around. But I do think you're right. It could be a combination of he can't find his room. He could have dementia.
Right.
It could be multiple things. What I would like to know is what era he's from,
Yes.
because it spans so long. And I think it could also be helpful to know how old he is, because that could give us more information into, is he walking around because he's confused because of dementia?
Right.
Is he just confused in general? Of course, a young person could also have a traumatic brain injury that could lead to some confusion and could also have these symptoms of walking around. I think it would be interesting just to get more data on him and who he is.
Yes, I think Willie would be a really interesting spirit to try the spirit box on to see if we get anything, or to try recording and to possibly get EVPs, because I really would like to know more about him, like to know what he's doing there,
Yeah.
what he was doing there. Yeah.
There's another resident that has a name that haunts the infirmary, and this is Jane Householder. And her story is quite tragic. We do know why she haunts it. She was burned alive after a gas stove caught her clothing on fire.
That is horrific.
Yes, and it makes a lot of sense to me that she is still haunting the area.
Absolutely.
When she is seen, she's seen wearing a dress, and she's seen many places throughout the building. So she seems to roam as well.
Okay.
Unfortunately, there are no reports of successful interactions with her, which leaves so many questions.
It's nice to hear that Jane is sort of wandering around this building because, with residual hauntings, those are events that repeat themselves kind of without observable consciousness. And of course, we can't really explicitly define what the spirit is experiencing in that moment. But I'm very glad that it seems like Jane is not reliving this event over and over again.
Yes, and I think it's noteworthy that from what I read, when she appears, she doesn't appear burnt.
That's good.
So it seems like she's pre-death.
Right.
And hopefully more peaceful.
Yes.
Again, I just think there's so much possibility for interaction here. And unfortunately, it doesn't seem like she does want to interact. So I think what you're saying could be true, that she might not even realize.
Oh, yeah.
While the building was used for health department offices, workers claimed to see the apparition of a young girl. And when she appears, she's a little girl, blonde, and seems sad.
Oh, no.
Many have dubbed this spirit Susie, and she is seen in a few locations around the property, including offices and the morgue. It is challenging to interact with her, as she's said to quickly disappear when investigators try to engage with her.
Which I think does make sense for a child.
Especially a sad child.
Yes. I mean, she's probably scared also, in addition to being sad. And of course, if any stranger sort of approaches her, I think it makes sense that she sort of disappears and runs.
I think in general, the trend with these residents is they don't really want to be disturbed.
Yeah.
They probably didn't have a great life living in this overcrowded almshouse. They've had terrible circumstances that likely brought them here. Who knows if she was an orphan? Maybe that's why she's sad. We have Jane's story, which is tragic. We're not 100% sure on Willie, but it makes sense that they just want to be left alone.
Yeah, and I think if the spirits are able to interact with each other, if they are aware that there are other spirits in the building, they may kind of lump investigators and spirits in the same vein of just leave me alone.
That's a good point. I think I always think of it as the spirits are like a family and we're coming into their house. But especially if they're from different eras, maybe they aren't interacting, maybe they don't like each other, etc. Maybe Jane and Willie have beef. Jane's like, Willie, why are you always walking around?
Right.
Who knows? Something interesting, and I want your opinion on it. Do you think the lavender perfume could be associated with Jane?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I did not make that connection in my mind, but yeah, I mean, that makes perfect sense, I think. If, as you said, she's wandering around the building and is clearly a significant presence, we haven't been able to connect with her to ask her if she's worn lavender perfume, but that would be one of my first questions.
Right. And nothing that I found associates them together. So this is all my speculation.
Right.
And this is going to sound very morbid, but I wonder if she's producing this scent, this perfume, because she doesn't want to smell like burnt flesh the way that she died.
Oh.
So it's almost like a cover-up.
Yeah.
Just a theory. We have to go there and try to talk to her and discern.
Right.
So we have the little girl, Jane, Willie, the shadow figure, sounds, EVPs, etc. This place is quite haunted.
Yeah, definitely. There's a wide range of people, which you had said in the beginning, the whole place, the purpose of the place included a wide range of people. But really, there are so many different spirits here.
Yeah, and it's actually really grown in popularity as a paranormal destination. It was featured on Destination Fear, and since then, the reputation has only continued to grow.
Right.
With lots of people coming in. So hopefully in coming years, we might even get some additional information about who these people are, and we can continue building on it. If you've been to Fairfield Infirmary, we would love to hear from you. You can email us at theteam@hauntedus.com and name Haunted Atlas Episode 4 in the subject. Or share your story with us on Instagram @hauntedus. Tune in for future episodes to see where we drop the pin next on our adventure across the haunted US. This episode of Haunted Atlas was presented by Sarah Sweeney and Erica Barrett. It was researched by Sarah Sweeney, supported by research from Haunted US head writer, Mitch Goth. Production assistance by David Sweeney. Our executive producer is Brandon Ruxey. Haunted Atlas is a production of Haunted US. Visit hauntedus.com for more information.